All right, so we are live. Thank you for joining us, everybody. My name is Stephen Gayle. I'm the founder and executive director of the Afro-Amerindian Research and Cultural Center. I'd like to welcome you all to this is our now fourth ARC Roundtable. This one is discussing arts and education, and I would like to now introduce our wonderful panel. We have some people also waiting to come in a little bit later. But right now, I'd just like to introduce our current panel. First, we have Shaniqua Gaye. Shaniqua is an Atlanta native, receiving her BA in painting from the Savannah College of Art and Design, and an MFA at Georgia State University. Ms. Gaye's work evaluates place, tradition, storytelling, and subject matter to develop imaginative dialogues and alternative strategies for self-imaging. Through installations, paintings, performance, video, and monumental sculptural figures, she fabricates environments of ritual and memorial. By developing counter and reimagined narratives that live within the duality of physical and spiritual worlds, she explores the historical and contemporary social concerns of hybrid cultures through the gaze of African ascendant female progenitors. Currently, she's an Emory University Arts and Social Justice Fellow, a program which explores the racial injustice and other inequities, leading to creative projects on campus and to the wider community. Next, we have Shay Harley. Shay is the owner and CEO of House of Harley Radio, in which the overall mission is to educate, empower, and entertain all walks of life. He seeks to bridge the gap between generations by ushering and healing in the areas of gender equality, socioeconomic class, and race relations, and also engaging youth to speak out directly on topics concerning them. He is currently running as a candidate for the Richland County District 1 School Board in Richland County, South Carolina. Not yet attending, but soon to be, will be Jahan Osayan. They are a multilingual, non-binary artist, activist who founded Earthseed, which is located in Seattle, Washington. Their multidisciplinary artistic practice, for which Earthseed is the home, uses theater pedagogy, how we read and understand story, cultural semantics, the stories that our bodies tell with and without our consent, to more deeply understand the identities we've developed in opposition to oppressive constructs and not simply in accordance to our own beliefs. Jahan is also a member of the Actors Equity Association, a Gregory Award-nominated playwright, whitewater canoeist, director, and ceramicist. Most recently, they returned from a 3-month residency in Blanca Murcia, Spain, where they use viewpoints, Spanish, English, and Jamaican patois to explore intergenerational trauma. Ava Macias is a PhD candidate in critical dance studies at the University of California, Riverside. She is of Native American, Black, and Mexican heritage, specifically Amscapi Picuni, Bros Ventre, and Assiniboine. Ms. Macias holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Dance with a modern emphasis from Utah Valley University. In addition to her own dance practices and studies, Ms. Macias teaches fancy shawl and hoop dance for the Title VI program for Native American youth in the Wasatch area of Utah. A little bit later, we'll be joined by Monty Ross. And Monty is a versatile and accomplished filmmaker, producer, and director. He's an alumnus of Clark College, now Clark Atlanta University. Mr. Ross gained notoriety working as a production supervisor for the classic She's Gotta Have It. From there, he would go on to co-produce films such as School Days, Do the Right Thing, Mo Better Blues, Jungle Fever, Malcolm X, Crooklyn, and he also worked as the executive producer of the film Clockers. In addition to his partnership with Spike Lee, Ross also produced advertising campaigns for Nike Air Jordans and Levi's 501s. He also produced music videos for artists such as Stevie Wonder and Prince. Most recently, he directed the period film, The Opera Game, and has been serving as president of film productions for Solidify Productions. Last but definitely not least, is Ms. Martha Redbone. She's an award-winning, multifaceted singer, songwriter, and educator with songs and storytelling that share her life experience as a Cherokee, Shawnee, Choctaw, and Black woman, and a mother in the new millennium. Ms. Redbone gives voice to issues of social justice, bridging traditions from past to present, connecting cultures, and celebrating the human spirit. Alongside her career as a recording artist and songwriter, Martha Redbone has maintained a steady involvement with causes she believes in. She is contracted by the Department of Indian Education, Louisiana, and teaches Southeastern traditional singing workshops for the United Huma Nations Bayou Healers Cultural Enrichment Camp Program. In addition to these accomplishments, Ms. Redbone is also the 2020 Drama Desk Award recipient for Outstanding Music in a Play for her work on the Broadway production for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough. So I would like to welcome all of you today. Thank you for coming. I mean, it's an honor to have you all here with me today and to discuss these very pertinent issues regarding the arts. And I wanted to make sure that we had a panel that was diverse enough and widespread enough to kind of discuss, multiple facets of the arts. A lot of times we just think visual arts or we'll just think, theater, but to kind of get a widespread of contributions to the arts and how that influences education is very important. So I'd like to welcome you all. And first, I would like to start off with a question for everyone. What are some of the issues that you see in education as it relates to the arts, with an emphasis on the African American and Native American communities as you see? And if we would start with Ava, and we can move on from there.
Okay, hello. So I'll speak to what I recognize in dance and dance in higher education. This is a discussion I've been a part of in communities out here as well. But one of the major issues that we're recognizing in the field of dance and is the epitomization of Western dance forms, of ballet as kind of like the top of the hierarchy of what constitutes dance, and lack of space for different cultural representations in dance and in education spaces. So that's what I recognize as one of the number one issues.
And Shanika?
Yeah, I'll say one of the things I recognize is the lack of integrating the cultural practices of, or the separation of spiritual and academic, right? So those are always separate when we have a cultural normative for those of us who are people of hue, where rationale and spirit are not separate, right? So it's a part of the whole being. And so one of those needs to be something I feel like is enforced, especially now, right? Where we're kind of having this undergird of things changing. I feel like we can speak to that pedagogy of that there is no separation, right? Because to be a whole human, you have to have both. And so I think that's really important for our sons and daughters as they come up, to know that they don't have to separate themselves. They don't have to disconnect themselves. And those of us who grew up in Western civilization recognize that academia, especially the higher up you get, they require you to separate that, right? As though spirituality has no rationale. And it does, right? So that's a part of the human experience. And so that's a major that I feel like needs to take note, and one that needs to be broken.
Shay?
Yes, once again, I'd like to thank you for inviting me, Stephen. Grateful to be here. And I'm kind of stemming down from my last panel discussion because it was getting heated. So I'm happy to be here because this is something that I'm passionate about. So one of the things I think that's missing or having an issue with is funding and support. Where are most of you, if I could, I don't know if you said what state you all live in, but I'm in South Carolina. Is everybody in South Carolina or different states? So yeah, okay. So I won't ask where you're from. So here in South Carolina, one of the biggest problems we have, especially in our education system and even in our public, is funding of the arts. We put a lot of emphasis on sports, but we forget about the arts. And there are awesome people that have come from South Carolina. And if you can tell by what I'm wearing and what's playing behind me, Chadwick Boswell came from Greenville, South Carolina. And we also have another Marvel character, Luke Cage, and we went to the same school, University of South Carolina, and I remember him. So a lot of people miss those people. Like when you find out they're from South Carolina, you're like, what? And so here, the biggest problem that I see is funding, and also the support and supporting in our Black communities, because we kind of look at it. It's a very competitive area here, and we don't get enough. A lot of the independent filmmakers and some of the folks that are in the arts don't get the support and the funding. The funding can, if you put on a production and you don't, and it's very good, but you get like 100 people come out, it kind of discourages you from doing it again. So definitely funding and support.
Martha?
Well, see you, everybody. Thank you for inviting me onto this panel. We're like right out the gate, and I'm inspired already by everybody and everything that I've heard. So I'm very grateful to be a part of this discussion. I agree with every single one of you completely, and I'm just gonna, co-sign everything, because one of the main things that I have come across just in the past few years recently, and this is clearly a problem, because when we do when I've attended and been invited to roundtable discussions at conferences and things like that, this is a huge issue. And exactly what Miss Shaniko said, and Miss Eva and Shay have said, when you're dealing with creating art from people of color, Black and brown people, one of the main things that people do not understand is that culture in all forms of art and language and home life, all of these things are intrinsic in spirituality. These are what make up every human being from every culture. It's just that once it has become commercialized over here through the white gaze, that things have changed. And also through the white gaze, Black and brown communities are marginalized, because we simply have been only seen for the purpose of service, being of service. So when it comes to having our artistic expression, through colonization, when it was being seen as a form of witchcraft to be performed against the oppressors, we had everything taken away from us. We had our names, we had our languages, we had our dances, our ceremonies, everything taken away and beaten out of us. And if we were caught using it, and made laws forbidding us to even to gather in prayer. As we can see today in 2020, there are laws to enforce us, to prevent us from gathering in the name of justice for our own people. So it's all about control. And what Mr. Shea said is right. It starts with funding at the top of all of that, because when you look at all of the organizations who govern the funding, I always want to see what their board members look like. And I guarantee you, most of the time, they're not people who look like us, who are in charge of distributing the money. And if we could have, when we always say representation matters, these words are not just words. We mean that for a reason. There needs to be someone from our communities, from the Black and brown communities, who understand our culture and the things that we need, so that when we create works of art, it is a given that as part of the funding, we need a fund for community outreach. We need a fund for going to schools and inviting kids. We need a fund that covers, our outfits for our dances. for costume, for outfits, costume designs for performances, all kinds of things. We need a fund for all of these things, because whenever we're creating art, we're employing our entire community. We want our community to be a part of it. And in most boards of directors, they don't see that as one fund. They see that as a separate fund. So they don't understand that what we have is inclusive. They also, because they don't understand that, because there's no one representing us on those boards, it's also perceived that we don't know what to do with certain amounts of money. So there's also a cap of what Black and Brown arts funding is, as opposed to what they feel has more value. Like in what Miss Eva said, with ballet being at the top, for some reason this is celebrated more than anything else. So that's the problem. I think we need more of our own at the board table, with a say on how funds should be distributed with respect to each, to the pieces that they're programming. And for the boards of directors, most people, especially in this day of age, sorry to take up too much time, but in this day and age, with all the movements through COVID and Black Lives Matter and women's movement, all of these things are inspiring organizations to want to be progressive. We see you see all of these things. The Me Too campaign, all of these things that are happening. So organizations want to address that and include that in their programming. They'd like to include it in their programming in order to, a lot of them would like to be progressive, but as we discover when we dig deeper, they don't necessarily want to be progressive. They just want to look like they're being progressive. And that's what needs to change.
Thank you. And so I have a question, and I'm gearing this more towards Shaniqua and Martha, mainly because of the work that you guys both do regarding some social justice aspects of your work. But feel free, because again, the roundtable, everybody's supposed to chime in as you see fit. But do you think that art has to address social issues? Is that the responsibility? And is there a level of social responsibility that has to come with art? Or can it just be separate from all of that? Like, I'm just an artist, I'm not an activist.
I think it is a Western notion to create art for art's sake, right? Whereas from a maybe old world indigenous and native mindset, we created artwork for a reason, right? And then when you're thinking about social aspects from Black perspectives, you can't be a person of color, and you pretty much can't be a woman and not create work that has some type of social or political aspect to it. They almost don't allow it when you're talking about the rules of the art world. My creating anything about my people is a no-no. My creating anything about being a woman is a no-no, right, in the Western art world. And so I'll say for me, right, it says for me in my house, I'm concerned with social concerns for my people. I'm concerned with unearthing. I'm concerned with counter narratives, dispelling stock narratives that we are fed constantly through media. And so for me, it is important that my work have a voice and that it has a social consciousness to it. But that's just for me. I can't speak for everybody across the board. Our people are not monolithic. And so I'll just say for me solely.
I would say, just, as a Black and Native woman, I think it's almost impossible to not to be that. And I think for me, I think it's unnatural to actually separate it. I think how can we emotionally separate our story? How can we, there has to be something that psychological that cuts that off, that blocks that. And so I think that it's not only the responsibility not just to the community. I mean, the way I was raised, I was raised by my grandparents in Appalachia, and they basically said, when you go out here, you act like you got some sense because you are representing me. So you get out there and you act a fool, they're going to say, who raised you? You have no home training. And this goes back, to through generations. So when you're out there, we have a saying, you walk in beauty, you walk in beauty because you are representing everyone who's come before you, and all your ancestors are standing behind you, and you have the tools, and you're standing here because of them, and you represent the resilience. I apologize for my piano. My son is upstairs working. I tried to get as far away as possible, but it's still coming through.
Good
But
background music.
I know.
I was like, Steve, are you playing that? Where's that coming from? It's all good.
That's my son, So what I'm saying is, I, in my personal thing, I can't imagine the two being separated. I think it's our human responsibility to not only to our community and to ourselves, but we are, when this is a calling of what you do, when something in the arts, a form of arts is what you're doing, and you're called and been given this kind of calling to stand on a public platform to represent everything that you are, or whatever it is that you're lucky enough to be expressing, and that you're a voice for your people, whether you want to be or not. As soon as we're on the screen, you are a voice for your people, and you're a voice for people who are like you, and a voice and offering something from your own family story. And that's when you're given that responsibility, you can't let the sides down, So I do think it's kind of hand in hand, and I couldn't really imagine it being anything else. And as Ms. Shaniqua said, that when you're, it's kind of like, we're all different, but the stories, are each individual story has meaning, and it's something that we are all in this together when it comes to the Black and brown story, especially when it comes to America and the diaspora of where we all come from. Each unique story has value, but there is a connecting line that is important, and important in the progression of what's to come from everything that we express through art.
Thank you. And Eva and Shay, I kind of wanted to know, like, where do you guys think the arts contribute to education? So, like, do you, like, how, you kind of express how you feel it contributes, but, like, what do you think it adds? Like, and what would the absence of that do?
Ladies first.
Thank you. So I really quickly just wanted to add one more thing, or add on a little bit to what Martha and Shaniqua were speaking to it, in terms of ancestors, in terms of responsibility. And this is where that spirituality component, I think, fits in also with art. And I'll get to the question as well with arts and education, but I'm thinking about elder and scholar Betty Bastian, who is Siksika, Blackfoot, and also talks about how that our relationships to our ancestors are not outside of ourselves, that it's our responsibility to nurture that relationship. That's a sustainable way, a sustainable practice of being. And I think about that with art, going back to how Martha and Shaniqua expressed, like there's a responsibility there. And when I am creating art, when I am creating dance, I'm embodied decolonization. Like I am revitalizing my culture, bringing my culture back to me, or if I'm sharing dance, it's giving back, giving culture back. And when I say decolonizing, it's I'm thinking about decolonizing like a big point is not as a metaphor, not in exchange for something that we want it to be, but like that decolonization drawing from Tuck and Yang as like literal repatriation or rematriation of land and life back to people. And I think through the arts, that's a way that we get there. And so this ties back to that responsibility, at least for myself as an artist, as a dancer. There's a responsibility to acknowledge, to engage with ancestors, or think of ancestors, or think about what is my art doing that I'm putting out there. And then in terms of arts and education, I think arts is another way of knowledge. It's another, and it's not even like, it's not like a way of teaching or a mode of teaching, like another concept, like it actually carries knowledge. Like, so dance carries, like there is embodied knowledge that I can learn from dance, that others can learn from their own dancing and their physicalities, but as an individual or within their communities. So I think taking that to education, you know, there's history in our embodied knowledges, there's lineage there, and that's what I have come to know for myself. So yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of want to go back to that question as well, because I just want to make sure that we add some important points. So
no, we don't have enough time.
I'll try to sum it up in about a minute if I can. How much time we got? What time is this thing over?
Not enough for that, but
okay.
Go ahead. You're good.
But so basically, art depicts life, right? So, you know, if we watch film and stuff, there's a thing on Netflix called 15 Million Credits. And in that show, in that episode, people were virtual. They had virtual people at events. And so here we are today in the NBA, people are watching the games virtually. Art depicts life. And I wanted to talk about Chadwick real quick. Chadwick is the epitome. He passed away, God rest his soul. He is the epitome of what we go through as Black people in America. He basically had to work to provide for his family, knowing that he was dying, while at the same time being an influence, an inspirer of art to his family and to people. And I think that is a great sacrifice that he made. And that's something that we all go through in our families. We make sacrifices and people don't even know that what we're going through, but we still wake up in the morning, we go to work, we follow the rules, and we go out there. So yes, art depicts life. Life depicts art. We can help soften the blow to what that brings on social change and bringing people together. And that's why I do what I do on House Party Radio, is that entertainment brings people together to bring on social change and bring about change. And so your point about education, what was your question about education real quick?
So essentially just where do you think, you know, if with the absence of the arts, how does that impact education? How does that impact?
Oh my gosh, it impacts everything, because like I said before earlier, you're missing out on people that have a talent that they don't, and when you get to a certain age, you don't have a place to express it at. So where do you express, you know, athletes, they go from pee-wee football, from middle school, high school on up. But in the schools, you know, if you don't have that, the funding and the availability, you're missing out on people that are doing awesome things if you're not pushing it in the education. Where else are they going to express it at? You know, because that's hard in South Carolina. I don't know where the rest of y'all at, but here that's tough. So I try to put that all in, wrap that in. I don't know how far I went, but hopefully that was like 2.5 minutes.
You're good.
Could I wait? Could I weigh in again? Is that okay?
Yeah.
I already love you, Mr. Shea. You really.
I love y'all too.
You know, the thing about it is, there's always been funding issues in the Black and brown communities, it has not stopped us from expressing our art and teaching our art to our children. It just hasn't stopped it. It's made it slower, you know. But you know, there was a time in this country when it was against the law to teach Black people to read and write. You know, my grandpa's a Choctaw down the bayou, and Indian children were not allowed to be educated after the age of 10. They had to go and do sharecropping. And that was the law. And especially if you weren't one of the Choctaw bands who went to Oklahoma, you know, and those groups got sent to the boarding schools. But in those swamps, you know, BIA was not going down 150 miles down the bayou looking for Indians to, you know, to put in the agency and send, you know, to boarding schools. But so my grandpa's generation, you know, he learned how to basic reading and to write his name, but everything else, no. So, you know, but look at all of his kids and look at all of his descendants, you know. I think that we can teach our children and our grandparents can teach us and so on and so forth. The whole thing is the practice of the work and of the art continues in our communities. And the funding isn't there. You're right. It's never been there. It's always been a struggle. They give it and then they snatch it away. But, and so we can't do it the way we would like to do it, but we still do it. You know, I know in a lot of the southern states, the church is a huge part of that. You know, they have the Boys and Girls Clubs. And I remember I'm here in New York City, and I remember that the school that I went to art school, but they only taught illustration. They weren't allowed to teach painting. They could teach watercolor, but they were not allowed to use oils. You know, oil and turpentine and things like that were considered flammable. And so that was not part of the curriculum. We weren't allowed to use that during the school hours. But my teacher, who was our mentor, Mr. Sherman, a really old Jewish guy who was teaching in the, you know, art in the New York City high school education system, he lived in Connecticut, and he used to drive in, and he said, if you can be at the school at 7 a.m., I'll bring your oils and everything, and I'll teach you the works of the old masters, you know, of all the, you know, Picasso and Van Gogh and Rembrandt, and show you all of those techniques. But you got to come, if you come in at 7 a.m. So there were like 15 of us. We were leaving our house at 6 in the morning, getting on the subway. My mother thought I was crazy. Where are you going out here at 6 o'clock? It's still in the dead of night, you know, and stuff like that. And we're like, we're going, Mr. Sherman is teaching us. Mr. Sherman is teaching us painting. And so we get there, and he would teach from 7 to 8. 8:05 is when the school curriculum started officially. And I learned how to do all the oil painting and all the techniques of the old masters and Rembrandt and all of that, because he did it and he wasn't getting paid for it. But he felt it was important enough to teach these young people. And I was one of those young people. You know, and from that training when I was in high school, before my music career, you know, I won a fellow to study at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and for one whole summer, Cooper Union School of Art, which is like super exclusive here in New York City. And so what I'm saying is that people in the community, if they care, they hand it down, they pass it forward, money or no money, it happens anyway.
Yeah, I'll just speak to what it looks like not to have arts education in our schools. It's likened to taking the basketball hoop rings out of the parks, right? So what do you get when you remove that? You get violence, you get aggression, you get thievery. And so when you remove the arts out of our schools, that's what you get. Or you get programmatic requirements like SEL, social emotional learning, where you got to teach children how to have empathy. The arts teach you that, right? Because it's not just about beauty and inspiration and expression. The arts also teach disruption. It also teaches to be apart from, right? It also teaches you to rebel, that you don't have to go with the way things are. Art teaches that, which is why you can see how it can be problematic, which is why you can see, especially within the Western civilization, why they defunded the arts quickly. So any place that has a functional arts community, right, you actually have an upswing where education is concerned, right? So when you're looking at Germany, Germany gives $1 billion a year. I'll say that again. Germany gives $1 billion a year to their arts program. Their arts is mostly theater and dance, but they give $1 billion to it every year. Whereas we here have to beg for it. You got to strive for it. It's like up in arms. And then the other thing they've tried to do is separate the arts and sciences. Remember the School of Arts and Sciences? It means it's not separate. And so they've tried to now say that science and technology is separate from the arts. You can't get science and technology without the arts. That's not how that goes, which is why they had to go from STEM to STEAM. Because the science, right? These creative mathematicians could not imagine, right? Because you got to have the arts in order to do that, right? And so the separation is something that it's a cold, it's like these metropolises that they try to create. You know, when you're looking at, especially when you're talking about how the arts reflect life, look at the dystopian futures that they create for us through movies. Look what they say is that our future will look like. We're gonna have a future with no trees, right? They want these stone metropolises, right? With nothing but buildings and no trees and no animals. That is not a representation of the creator for those of us who believe that there is one who exists. And that is also going against the grain of the life force. We don't want that, or at least I don't want that. They also create a world with no people of color, right? They want everybody beige or white. And so it is our responsibility, and especially when you're speaking to Chadwick Boseman and all of those who played a part in the Black Panther, it was a representation of a new future, right? In which we were the leadership, in which we have agency, in which creation is very attainable, is tangible, right? So when you're talking about where we are right now, and allowing Western civilization colonizers to decide how things should go, we are looking at a disruption of a lot of situations in which we're saying, as people of color, that's not how we want to be treated. As women, that's not how we want to be treated. As others, that's not how we want to be in control. And we want to be funded. And we want to be supported. And we want our spirit to be a part of these things. And so I think the arts and education, or the education without the arts, is problematic. And we should be responsible for creating new stories and new narratives of how that needs to go, and not allowing current administration to decide that for us.
Yeah, and just as a quick aside, I remember I went to, like, when I was in middle school, I was in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia is known for, like, its murals and, as a city being very arts centered in many ways. But I also, part of the reason why I even asked that question was, it also seems like it's a track that you kind of get on in many ways, especially when you're talking about education. If you're an artist, you get on this artist track, and then you get guided in that direction. And if you're not exposed to it, you're not on that track. And therefore you don't really go in that direction unless you push yourself to go in that direction. And so I remember in middle school, we didn't have art or music, like, of any kind. Like, I went through my entire middle school career without having any art classes whatsoever, no music classes whatsoever. We had one music class where we kind of just did, like, sing along with whatever the teacher wanted to bring to class that day, and no other arts. And so, and then I noticed by the time I got to high school in another state, they had, these kids like, well, you're only in band if you did music in middle school. You get, into the arts the Governor's School for the Arts program, if you already were doing stuff and you got kind of tagged in elementary and middle school, and then you get on this track. And so then you kind of stifle yourself in the process just by suggestion. And so I guess that was kind of the underlying meaning behind that question. Because like, when you don't have it, do you get steered in different directions? Or do you think that if you're just an artist, you're an artist and you're always going to express yourself, kind of like what you were saying, Martha? But, any input on that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Miss Shanika. Go ahead.
Oh, well, no, I was just going to say that it's elitist, right? The reasons why they try to steer you away from that or steer certain communities away from that is because they try to create a gatekeeper for how you have access to it. And you notice that funding goes to certain communities, and then it's always up in, arms, where you have, art teachers who go school to school, push cart teachers who go from school to school because funding isn't available for certain communities. And then you have all of these great grants that become available that are all steered by normally European women, nonprofits. I know because I've worked for several, right? So like it's always like they are always the answer. They're always the gatekeepers. They're always the holders of your access. I can't tell you how many friends I've had who said something similar, like, I didn't have access. I was creative, but I didn't have access. Or the familial language in which you can't eat through the art, right? Where they tell our communities who are nothing but creatives that we can't eat, but yet they find a way to be able to eat eat through their work, right? So I'll stop there and let Martha speak to that.
Absolutely, 100%. I do think that I hate to say it, and I don't like the, it is tracking. It's absolutely that. And also it upsets me because for a school, for you to enter a high school and there be something that you have an interest in and want to be able to learn. Now, you enter high school, how old are you? 14 years old in the ninth grade? I mean, and how dare a teacher or a dean or a principal or anyone say, if you didn't have this and you can only have this if you had this in middle school. What if you lied and said, yeah, I had it? Then it'd be, okay, come on in. Do you see what I'm saying? And so they put us, they're putting Black and brown people in the position where we have to hustle for everything if we want it. So, you know what I mean? So at, 14 years old, if you were a hustler type of 14-year-old, you would have been in that band. You know what I mean? You would have been in that band class and you would have been tracked because you put yourself in that place, because they basically let it be known that this is exclusive and has a gate, a gatekeeper, as Shaniqua said. So that has been the story of all of our lives, And to me, this is why I keep saying the representation matters when it comes to that funding. And you're absolutely right. The organizations or the gatekeepers are, white women, and white men who are, whatever the story may be, and they have an idea of wanting to make the world a better place, but it's through their eyes of what they feel is important. And an objectified version of who we really are. And they'll, these people who have the power will go along with us until we say something that disagrees with them. That is not the way that they see the vision. And it's not about them. And this is what happens. As soon as it's something that doesn't go along with what their track is, or what doesn't make them look good, or something that still goes back to this narcissistic kind of thing where it's back to someone that has nothing to do with it, we have a problem. And we're always going to have a problem. We're always going to have to get our hustle on. Look what Spike Lee did with The Way Hollywood. He did it anyway, and he did it great, and he's a hero anyway. because that's what he had to do. And I think everyone sitting here on this panel, we understand that that is part of the process and that is out there for us to do. I love the fact that that everyone is making noise now. And when you have times like this where things are being exposed that this is wrong and that this needs to be changed, that's one thing. But to actually put it into place and actually see it happening, um, I'm not talking about just putting a brown face up front, saying, here, let's put this person and make them, hero of the month, or let's, harp and everybody cry because this young man who is such a wonderful actor and representative for the Black community passed away yesterday. I'm not going to cry for the next 3 days, about that, because I'm still looking at who we're going to vote into this administration, because I know that this young man who made these films and chose these roles strategically is because he wants us to make this change. Now he's not here. We got to do it for him. So we have to keep that. Yes, we mourn, but we have to keep the eyes on the prize, because they want us to be slaves to this social media. They want us in an emotional state. They want us to feel helpless or marginalized or invisible, so that we feel that there's no hope, that we won't be listened to. And people say, oh, it's rigged anyway, so what's the point? Oh, they look what they're doing. They're taking away all the mailboxes. Oh, look what's happening to, you know what I mean? There's all of these things happening, but, we still got to be, Underground Railroad people and still help people get on through, that's kind of how we always have been. So with regard to arts education, exactly the same thing. We got to get our hustle on and keep it moving.
Yeah, so Mrs. Redbone, to add on what you're talking about as far as hustling, see, both of my children, they actually want to be in the arts. And I kind of in the beginning, I kind of cringed a bit because, this is just me and my selfishness. My son is my size. I'm 6'3". I'm a big guy, and he's actually my height, and he's 15. And so everywhere he goes, a lot of people say, are you playing football? And he's like, he kind of gets mad about it now because he's not an athlete. And I had to accept that. He's not an athlete. My daughter, they're both tall. They're not athletes. And they're actually interested in the arts. They want to be animators. My daughter's an actor, and she's actually sing on the chorus in high school as well. And so I had to sit back and I love my parents. Don't get me wrong. I love my parents. But my parents come from a time where it was just important to go to school, get your high school diploma, go to college, get a job. It really it didn't matter what your dreams and goals were. And so I always wanted to be in the arts. And it's weird, after all these years, I've been in the military, I'm an IT professional. Where am I back at right now? I'm back into the arts. It never leaves you. It's there. It's always there. So with my kids, I just tell them, I'm like, look, I keep it real with them. If you're going to be an animator or be a singer or actor or actress, you have to be the best, because we in our African American community, we have to fight through so much. And what you said, Ms. Redbone, stuck with me, because you really do have to hustle, because a lot of times in the art, you don't get paid. It's hard. It's hard. I've done free work. I'm a DJ too. And so I've done free work. I've done broadcasts for people, and I've done it for free at times. And it's in my heart to do, but every time I did something in my heart to do, it always led me to money anyway. So I always teach my kids, it's like, if you're gonna do this, you really have to hustle. You have to get out there and you have to be the best one no matter what. Because sometimes we'll even be the best and we'll still get looked over. And so that really stuck with me, because between education, funding, and motivation from home, like us as parents, we gotta, if our kids want to do this, you're like, okay, you want to do it, but I'm gonna put you out front. Don't be scared. If you're doing your artwork, I'm gonna put it on a board, see if you can sell it or whatever you want to do with it. So the key word of this 2020 right now, the key words is intentional and genuineness and integrity. Those are the three things in this year 2020 that with all this craziness going on, all the people that's out there doing crazy stuff, they're being exposed now. And the people that's been out here doing the work that are genuine, have the integrity and the passion and the fire to do this stuff, we're coming to the forefront. We're coming to take our position now. And so I want to, after this, I'm gonna send you guys something. Somebody, my campaign manager sent me, we're talking about art. They sent me a video. I didn't know what was going on in the video to the end. A young kid was walking through the field and he got to this doctor's office and he pulled up his shirt and he said, "Can you take this off for me?" And they didn't show what it was. And the doctor looked like, and he got sad and everything. And the camera focused on his stomach. He pulled up his shirt and he had a bullseye painted on his body. And the kid said, and the kid was like, "Can you remove it for me?" And the black doctor said, "I'm sorry, I can't remove that for you. That's there for life." It was a black kid. And so I'm really loving this conversation because a lot of this stuff right now is happening to me and all of us. It's all happening for a reason.
I just wanted to add a little bit more as well to the points made. Like, we talk about the hustle with art, and I also think that with the hustle, like, it's because of like having to survive in this extreme capitalistic society, right? But what about, and I sometimes want to say at a fundamental level, like, it's important to understand that there's value in art, but even saying value is playing into this capitalistic system, that art has to have value, that at a fundamental level, art like should be seen as necessary to a whole person, to a whole community, to people on a great scale. And so yes, there's a hustle, but then also like the hustle for what? Sometimes it's for in education, competing against each other, Black and brown folks competing against each other for that one spot, and I think that it's that institution of education that needs to reconsider and change the spaces that they're making for folks. Like in arts and education, we shouldn't be hustling to compete against each other for this one spot. If art is necessary and has a place. And I think that starts at the institution as understanding that one, and understanding what Black and brown folks have to offer, like what we're bringing, and prioritizing that. Making space is so necessary. So.
Absolutely. I just wanted to add to that, Eva. It reminds me of a campaign that I was a board member of, advisory board member of years ago. The Man Up campaign was a global youth movement to raise awareness on gender-based violence in women and girls around the world. And this was back in 2010. And the founder, Jimmy Briggs, is a wonderful old friend who invited me to be on the advisory board, and to the idea was our youth summit, the first youth summit that we had. The idea was to take 50 delegations from around the world, and these were young people aged 18 through 27, to gather in Johannesburg to talk about gender-based violence in their regions. And so for each delegation, there were 4 kids that we had. I call them kids, but young people. And so and so when it came to the USA, they had, I said, "What are we going to do for USA?" I said, "You can't just have, one white, one Black, one brown, one Asian, you know what I mean? That's like tokenism. You can't do that." And then, so there was a big discussion about that, not with just the founder, but it was like the board. And so, and I said, and there also needs to be a separate delegation for the Native American. There needs to be a Native American delegation. because there's gender-based violence on reservations that is not being dealt with, and that was right in the heat of the VAWA Act, Violence Against Women Act at that time too. And so I said we needed a North American Indigenous delegation separate from the American delegation. So in the beginning, everyone tells you yes, 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 but the idea was when they brought me on board, he brought me on board for this very reason. But some of the board members, I think they saw the native side of me as opportunity to get casino funding, native funding, which is oftentimes with the way people look at things. And it was interesting once they saw that I wasn't coming in to write a big tribal check for them, that it was they said, oh, well, why don't we just do the original thing, the plan that we have, and then later on down the line we'll make an Indigenous delegation and we'll deal with that later on. And I was like, no way, and so luckily, like I said, with the support of the founder, he was like, this is not the way that's happening. And so we did like a search, and I went on a Native American Calling and talked about it, and I had the support from the folks there. And it was weird. It was almost like it went from us being marginalized to almost being invisible to we had the floodgates open. We had it went from 400 applications to 700 applications after only one interview on Native radio. And we ended up with a North American Indigenous delegation, and everyone was able to talk about, in fact, we ended up with two. We had we had 7 students, Indigenous students, and everyone was able to tell the stories about what was going on back in their homelands. But that came from that determination, the demand of being represented, the understanding that the needs are separate and that there's space for everybody, not just filling up one seat and everybody has to duke it out. There has to be space, and that came from someone being on the board, representing, who understands that this is something that is necessary. And that's why I say it goes back to who's at the top with those checkbooks and who has that vote, and who understands what our needs are for everything. And if that doesn't happen from the top, it's never going to trickle down. We have once in a lifetime, you see someone who really truly believes in that happening, but for the most part we need our own. We really do.
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of reminds me even with there's always these designated spots that we can inhabit, and it's just you get 1 or 2 and then that's it. And then everybody, and then we look amongst ourselves as oh, it's crabs in the bucket, but the crab shouldn't be in a bucket in the first place. It's they're pulling each other down because that's the natural response to a limited opportunity. And so I think that's something I think we should always kind of be mindful of. But and also in keeping with the idea of representation and identity, I guess with all of you, how do you incorporate the multiple identities that you inhabit, whether they're the different cultural identities or personal identities reflected in your work? How do you incorporate those things? And this is open to anyone. I'll call on somebody.
My work speaks to hybridity.
Yeah.
And the experience of duplicities, dualities, the layers of being who we are, right? Mm-hmm. To kind of be African in body, but American in mind, right? And the push and pull that kind of comes with that. One of the things I can laugh and joke about now, when I went for a residency in South Africa, a lot of people thought my son and I were Xhosa, and began to speak to us in that tongue, and us spitting back, right, the Queen's English, and feeling tainted, right? So tainted in the homeland and tainted here, right? Just kind of looking at the ways in which acceptance in place. It always feels like this kind of push and pull, always in the wake, always in the hold of something, and trying to speak to that through my body of work, and trying to create right, these kind of devout figures that are representations of the ancestors. I'm pulling from all types of culture because I'm a couple of people, right? So like I have, Native American. I have a great grandmother who was Blackfoot and Japanese. I have it's my father's family just hood Black folks. So I have a lot of folks up there, and trying to look for different ways to be able to speak to that in my body of work. And so I'm doing that in a myriad of ways. So I'm a multimedia artist, right? So it's visual arts, it's spoken word, it's film, it's photography, it's all of those things. I don't hold to the art world notion that I have to create in series, right? So I have to build this oeuvre of one body of work over time, over my career, and that's the only thing I need to focus on. I don't do that. So I'm very interested in the multiplicity of ways in which I can speak to a varied amount of topics. And so I look for all of those ways that I pull, not just from myself, but from my ancestors and from my belief system to be able to speak to those things. So you didn't have to call on me.
You might have to do it like a hot button. Everybody press the button if you're ready to go. I was just being a gentleman, let the ladies go. But no, so I want to start. So, I was married and I'm now divorced now, and I'm raising my kids on my own. And during that time, I was kind of lost. I always knew what I wanted to do, what I'm doing now. I just didn't know how to go to do it. And so I figured it out. And one of the things that stuck through my college education is the Havelof's hierarchy of needs, where you have social awareness, economic awareness, your physicalness, your what's another one? There's other ones I can't think of right now. But the whole point of all those areas is to have that self-realization moment, to realize what it is that you're brought here to be. And as I went through my divorce and going through trying to find where I could put my kids, because daycares were turning my kids around because they were autistic. Yes, believe it or not. And so, I had to deal with a lot. I went through a lot of dating, the dating scene, and I just didn't feel like I was in the right place. And so I really had to have a come to Jesus moment with myself to figure out, what is my purpose? What did God put me on this earth to do? And so once I figured that out with my platform, it was just pretty much, that's where I've been going that whole time. Because with the mission is to empower, educate, and entertain all walks of life. And so my thing is that along with that mission, I want to strive to get people to understand that you can work 10 jobs and be in the politics. You can go clubbing and then go to the city council meetings and the county council meetings and sit in there and voice your opinion. You can, hang out in the street or whatever, but educate yourself, but at the same time, figure out what you're trying to do with yourself. I want it to be cool to get into things that are for some reason in our communities makes it seem like you're dull and boring if you get involved with those things. And so I come from a well-rounded family, and I've dibbled and dabbed in all kind of arenas of life. You can be hood, not that hood's bad, because I hate when people put a negative connotation with hood. There's intelligent people in the hood. You can be that way, but educate yourself about what's going on around you, and better your lives, better your children's lives, and have that self-realization moment. And I've had that self-realization moment. I never in a million years I thought I would be running for school board. Never, ever. And I'm here, and it's like all of that happened for a reason to land me here today. If I never had those things happen to me, I would have never met you, Stephen, when you did your film with the independent film that you did an awesome job with, by the way. And so I actually want to broadcast that again, but at some point. But so yeah, as far as like your identity, you really have to understand who you are, where you came from, and what it is that God, the universe, however you want to say it, brought you here on this earth to do, and do it. And that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, in speaking to identity, could I actually have you repeat the question for me? Sorry.
So how do you incorporate the different identities that you inhabit, whether they're your ethnic identities or just personal identities? How do you incorporate those into what you do and like into the ways you express your art or share it or teach through art?
Okay, thank you. So I think first, kind of just speaking to identity is like can be so widely encompassing, like you said, ethnic or gender, non-gender. There's a lot that identity can encompass, and also understanding that there can be trauma around identity, like what we come to know as our identity or that we're coming to realize about our identity. It could be an ongoing process. And the reason I mention that is because, you know, I strongly claim my backgrounds of being Native American. So I'm a Scapi Picani, Blackfeet, Assiniboine and Grovan, but I'm also Black and Mexican. And Mexican's all I got because I was displaced from that family, right? So and that's not unlike other folks who have identities that they've been displaced from for different reasons and different things beyond their control. So identity is so, to me, it's so heavy and it's such a responsibility. And, you know, I am thankful to know that, you know, we come from the Weaselhead family, from the family who's still out on the lands in Montana, that I can go visit those lands, but not every Native or Indigenous person has that access. And but anyway, like identity comes with so much responsibility and so much like ways of working with it to try to understand who we are. So for me, that's a lifelong process, but I do incorporate that. I wrote it down. I was thinking of, like, for me, or art and dance specifically, I think about it as lineage, because coming from my Unscapi Picani roots, my Blackfeet roots, my Native roots, teaches us the importance of lineage. Who is this ancestor that I'm carrying with me, or what is this knowledge I'm carrying with me? And so with dance as lineage, like what are the roots of the dance that I'm participating in, or that I am taking on or committing to? What are the roots of that practice? But also, what are the roots of the dance and the art that I'm creating too? Like, where is this coming from within me? And I'm thinking of, like, with art, like the movement or the dancing that I create, I always want to think about it as having intention and lineage, that there's something there. And there's been a lot of times where I've also worked to engage with the communities I come from, and especially if I'm using one of my Native dance practices. And even though I do powwow, and acknowledging powwow as secular and not standing for Indigenous dances, we have over 567 federally recognized tribes, hundreds of other unrecognized tribes that are working for recognition. Like, powwow is like kind of just a small aspect of it, and maybe a showy aspect of it, but I still incorporate that, and I work with that as lineage, and also work with the community, talk to my elders. I'm creating a new form of art, drawing on those knowledges. It becomes like a responsibility for me to engage with the communities that I'm working with, and that this is something that's close to me. I would feel deeply uncomfortable delving into something that is not my background, if that makes sense. Or I need to make a commitment to understanding that dance or that art as a lineage, if I am even going to participate in it. So hopefully that made a little bit of sense. And if there's any clarification, like I'm happy to also, yeah, kind of clear that up. I know it's a lot. So.
Oh, no, you're good. Martha, do you have anything to add?
Yes. I, well, as I said, I mentioned earlier, I was raised by my grandparents and my native side grandparents. My parents split up when I was 3 years old. My dad is African American from North Carolina. I wasn't really close to that side of the family. I only got to know them 4 years before my dad passed away when I was in my 30s. So I had this huge blank, if I knew the characters, if you know what I mean. I know the members of the family, but we never stayed in touch at all. And so I was raised by my grandparents in Kentucky, and my grandfather was a coal miner, and as I said, he was Choctaw, and he was also Alabama Cushata, which are Mexican and Black Mexican mix. And so my grandmother's Cherokee, Shawnee, and white. And so I was raised by these very simple, small town, humble people, and in a very old fashioned, traditional way, and then came to Brooklyn for middle school. So I was 12 when I came to Brooklyn, and that, after having this childhood one way, but then I had my teens and high school and all of that in the city. So, from 12 years old, New York City can really become who you are, anyway. And that was also at the time, giving away my age, but that was also the beginning of hip hop. So there was a huge um, wave of appreciating Black street culture. At that time during my teens, it came at the perfect time for me to kind of connect with that identity. Also, I wanted to say that I also have back home, I also have the honor of being adopted by the Youngbird Hall family of the Mandan Hidatsa Arikara people in North Dakota. And so our families are merged, and we're one now. And then there's also comes a big responsibility with that adoption, connecting our families and things. And so honoring my grandparents who raised me, honoring my mother who raised me, who worked 2 jobs to pay for my education, to feed us, to put food on the table. And for me, I didn't, you don't pay attention to, because you don't really know, you don't see yourself as, um, you know, you just come from your family and you are who you are. You don't know these kind of racial constructs that people place on you, that society place on you. You're just in your family. There's your mom, there's your aunties, there's your grandma, and grandpa, and that's kind of how it is. It's society that starts to place these labels on you and to make you have to choose certain things. So when I moved to New York City in the 6th grade, I came back to a, single parent household. I left when my parents were together. I came back to a single parent household, and we lived in the hood, as you say, and that hood was mostly Caribbean and Latina neighborhood. And so the kids were all of that. And one side of the street had the black kids, and the other side of the street had the Latino kids. So we lived on the Latino kid side, and those kids wanted me to make a choice, because I looked like them. My skin was the same color as the Latino people, and they didn't talk to the Caribbean families, right? And so they assumed because I looked the way I looked that I spoke Spanish, and I didn't speak Spanish. And so she said, "Well, we don't talk to them because they live over there." And there was that whole West Side Story kind of thing going on, and I had to make a choice at that age. Anyway, I chose to not be friends with either of them, and I became a kind of loner. And with I had one buddy from my class who lived, down the street from me, and we became the best of friends for a very long time. All that to say is, coming back to New York City into hip hop, we were playing all these records in the house, And, my dad left his record collection, so I had all James Brown and, the Jackson 5, all this kind of stuff. And and I'm just dancing around the living room. I'm trying to do Soul Train dances and stuff. And my mom is just looking at me and laughing and everything. And I put on Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. So I'm dancing, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. And when that record finished, my mom said to me, so is that all you are? You're only proud to be Black? You're Black and you're proud? Don't I count for something? And I went, So I thought, I'm doing something wrong here. I didn't think I was just dancing. I'm like, well, now I'm kind of like, what's going on?
He's like, there's more than Black in you right now.
And so she said, don't I count for something? And I was like, yes. And she said to me something very profound, and I shared this with Stephen during the symposium that we did last year. She said, do not participate in the genocide of your own people. Do not erase us. We're here. And that's where you come from. Do not erase don't participate in it. And
Powerful.
And that is super powerful. And that, I didn't really understand what that meant at 12 years old, but here I am, a grown woman, and I completely understand it because I've had years and years of getting the whole kind of derogatory remarks and the eye rolls when they say, I got Indian in my family and all of this kind of stuff. Well, I do have Indian in my family. We're the Anichishkoa people, we're the keepers of the feather. You know what I mean? And so they don't understand that matters. And when you're like, hanging out and trying to find your crew of sisters and stuff, it's really difficult because the Black community can often take you identifying with your mother who raised you as you denying your own Blackness. But it's not a denial of your Blackness. It is in addition to. Do you know what I mean? It's an appreciation of both cultures. And so I had this through my teens, and it was a very tough time for me to do this, to feel those emotions. Like I had to choose, like I was denying the existence of my mother while I'm this Black woman, that's clear that I'm this Black woman. And I love Black music. I love my Black friends. I love all of this, but I cannot ignore that this culture, this home culture that I had from, the people who raised me, I cannot pretend like they don't matter and they did not have a definitive effect on my life. And so when I became an artist, I realized that, number one, I'm not the only person who has this story. This is an American story. This is part of our diaspora. This is part of our journey. This is part of our, Trail of Tears and colonization and all of these things that we have all gone through. And it became something that I wanted to celebrate and to maybe open up the conversation by laying that out there, And but it's not the only thing. That's just something that I felt was important. As a touring musician, I've been told that I've learned around the world that they think Native Americans are dead, that we don't exist. They think we're dead. Can you imagine somebody saying, and it's so interesting. I mean, we can all imagine it because we are all Black and brown. But can you imagine? I've said this to a white person. If somebody says, "Oh, where are your people from?" They say, "Oh, we're Irish." No, you're not. Irish people are dead. No. My grandmother's
That would hurt.
Ireland. No, they're not.
Yeah.
They're not alive. That doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Can you imagine someone saying that, I'm like my mom who is like sitting at home in her living room, like, doesn't exist, and my grandparents don't exist. So, or if they're dead, that they don't matter and that culture doesn't matter. When I was raised with that culture, that's part of your story. Whether you were raised with it or not, you have the opportunity to learn about it, and that is an important part of that spirituality that Shaniqua had mentioned earlier. That spirituality and that keeping that connection of what these lines are that draw the work that you do, in art. And I think that's all of those connections. And when society, makes these disconnects and forces us to cut these things out of our lives emotionally, cutting those things is really cutting things off emotionally, and breaking that connection. And we've had it through oppression and all of that, but if it's there, and we have the opportunity to be able to reconnect, I think there's something very healing in that, with producing art, in that way with respect to that story.
Yeah, and the other thing I always found interesting, especially like with a lot of the, I do like a lot of genealogy kind of research and, and I guess decolonial research. And when it comes to African American identity in particular, it's like we don't view ourselves as an international people. We typically, or we've been conditioned to not view ourselves as an international people. We've been kind of conditioned to not view ourselves as a multi-ethnic people. And for all intents and purposes, everyone who's participating in this roundtable today is Black. They have African ancestry, and by definition of the colonizer, we are all of the same, or essentially the same people, but we all inhabit completely different cultural spaces, depending on how you look at it. And so I just find that very interesting that we typically don't view that. And then when you're talking about artistic expression, from the angle of Blackness, what is that exactly, and what does that actually look like, and how would you characterize it? Feel free to jump in there and answer that however you feel. But how do you express Blackness, and what does Blackness look like artistically?
I think our Blackness in this country is so different, because we were part of chattel slavery. And so, for centuries, we're not talking about just some little while. We're talking about people, we were bred like cattle, taken from everywhere, forced, and I haven't even begun to add in the rapes, rape and this kind of stuff going on. But we were no different from being treated as animals. And when you have 400 years of being treated like that and viewed in that way, and then from there, going to, from that part and going into a prison system, of oppression. When you think about that kind of treatment, and us as a Black community of people, we don't know, we're not just one tribe. We're not just one from one African tribe. Most tribes were nomadic anyways, so we're many, and we're not just one people. And that's one of the things that I think that we need to understand and kind of accept as part of the story. We have to accept the ugliness of it, and we also, I mean, for me personally, what's helped me accept the ugliness, is that everyone sitting here, we're here because of our resilience, the resilience of our people. We are the jackpot. We're the blessing because we're still here. You know, and it doesn't matter what the story is. The fact that is that we are not. We are very visible. We are very present, and we do have that story that runs through all of us. So and I think that is something that is very, very special and important.
So you asked the question about what is Blackness?
Yeah, how would you how do you view Blackness, and then how would you incorporate that in art? Like, how do you view Blackness in art
Oh gosh.
because of all these different experiences?
Being Black it is definitely an experience. And I had a very emotional morning because I want to kind of get through this because, I kind of had a very emotional morning because I think us as Black and brown folks, we're feeling the pressure of everything that's going on with us right now. And it's just bearing down our heads and our shoulders, and looking at what's happening with the NBA and how they, felt like boycotting, a day or a few days of games was the answer, or to at least get people to pay attention to what's going on, with us Black and brown folks. And so, I woke up this morning, I was just very emotional. My campaign manager sent that video, and I just ugly cried in my bed. And I was like, I hope nobody hears me because I'm just ugly crying in this bed. And so, even though I'm a big guy, I'm a very emotional guy, not in a bad way, but I've learned to express myself. And so, because my dad raised us in the military, and I'm an Air Force veteran as well. And so, just being Black is just an overall experience that, and like I said earlier, is that, again, the arts helps to personify that, to help push it out to people when people think they're going to be entertained. Like, look at what's happening in the NBA. Roundabout way, the arts is in the NBA when it comes to putting on the basketball court Black Lives Matter, on the back of their jersey, say her name, equality, all these different things that are being said. And, you know, it's amazing how being Black, how we're able to wake up and get out of the bed and do the things that we need to do. Like we had to, it doesn't matter that we're unemployed. It doesn't matter that you have a job and you're being, the people at your job are being racist towards you. It doesn't matter that you had a job and you're not getting paid enough at your job. Doesn't matter. Me as a Black man raising children on my own that are autistic, uh, um, I've lost 2 jobs. I had a job for 9 years where they didn't care about me going off to the school with each little issue that my kids had. But when I left to get a job that paid me a lot more, they didn't tolerate that. While they allowed other people to do it. But for me, being a Black man, it was an issue. I've lost my job twice. Right now I'm unemployed and I'm okay with it because, again, things happen for a reason, and I'm living my purpose. And God has been blessing me even throughout this pandemic. God has been blessing me. So it's amazing that we're able to get up and do the things that we do. And that's why I'm running for school board. That's why I'm pushing my online radio station even more, is because with that, art, again, it depicts life. And I want to push that out even more. I want to do commercials that show that, similar to what the kid with the bullseye on his belly. And it's because, in certain communities, they think that these things that are happening to us, they're not really happening. It's like, y'all just being emotional. You know, why, little Johnny and Adam that lives in another community than mine, they don't understand when they drive past the Capitol building where people are yelling Black Lives Matter. Why are they doing that? Oh, everybody's life matters, right? Right, Dad? Yes, son. But they don't understand why we're doing it. We're doing it for a reason. Art depicts life. Blackness is an experience that we go through that is just, you cannot compare it to any other experience ever. And so art is one of our best ways, even with dancing. It shows, because when you step on that stage, you're probably stepping on that stage, or dancers that step on the stage, they're going through so much, or that you found out afterwards, that they're going through so much. And you're like, wow, and you did that while you're going through that? We have done amazing feats, even being brought on the slave boats, being piled up on the slave boats, our families taken away from us. And we always, no matter what's taken away from us, we always seem to shine, no matter what. And so, yeah, we're going to use art because that seems to be a way that we can reach y'all. Yeah, we're gonna do these things in film and music and dancing or whatever. You're going to do it because we just want to be loved. We just want to be happy. We just want to raise our families. We just want to do things that everybody else enjoys. Blackness is an experience.
And just really quick, because we're running a little bit on time, I want to move to the next question. It's our last question. If everybody can just do a quick go round. With these roundtables, we don't want to just have it be, a bunch of people just talking and, just talking it up and that's it. And, the idea is that there are also going to be tangible outcomes to what we say here and things that people can take away with them and then try to incorporate in their communities and their own personal lives or perspectives. So what are some tangible things, what are some issues or tangible things that people could address or ways that they can go about doing that regarding their identity, regarding the arts, regarding educating and outreach initiatives for people, or even ways to connect with some of the things that you guys are a part of. And anybody can take it, and we'll just round robin it real quick. We got about 15 minutes. All right, I'll let Eva.
Okay. And I think it's going to also go back to also the previous question a little bit too, because recently my mom actually, I helped her organize and come up with a panel, and it was focused on the legacy of historical trauma between Black and Native people in the US. And we went through talking about the damaging terminology and understandings of half-breed, of how people understand mixedness, and how people are defined as Native and Black. And what the goal of that panel was to first bring this to attention and also share some historical background in relationship to the country and how the formation of the country and labeling our peoples, the attempted genocide, kind of brought us to this way of understanding, but also how we understand our identities, and then how do we do that internal work and carry that out into our communities. So if anything, that the work of like having that panel was to encourage these conversations to go farther wherever they are across the country or internationally. But then as far as, speaking to, like, I embrace all parts of me, and my understanding of my Blackness is very strongly from my mother, who is a single parent when she raised my brother and I, who is half Black and half Native, half Blackfeet. And she came from the reservation, but then grew up in a Black community in Inglewood. And that was a very big part of how we were raised, knowing the histories of our people, the culture, the arts, the music. And so, but I also understand, like, to what she was speaking to is, the Black experience is different, and me being mixed, that's gonna be very different than the Black experience of somebody else, of other Black folks. And I think my responsibility is to be aware of that and also take pride in my mixedness and my Blackness, but also, just being very aware. And then understanding, when I think about it with arts, I think about my relatives, like their way of being in the world and being Black, influence the way that they raise their kids, influence the way that that my mom raised me, you know, and so I am aware of that. And I'm also aware of the traumas that were passed down in our family, but the joys and the memories that were passed down. So for me, it's embracing that and having an awareness as well. But yeah, as far as tangible things, is continuing that internal work. It's a journey, and maybe some people feel that they have arrived, or maybe they have arrived. For me, it's going to be a constant journey, committing to and to always. I don't even want to say defend, but there are parts where I do need to defend, you know, in conversations outside of myself and in other communities, or take up space and bring others to that space. Yeah.
Shaniqua?
Gosh, that's such a weighty takeaway, right? I think keeping true to the way. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a book called 2000 Seasons by AARCC. It's really a good book. It tells our story as though it is fiction. But one of the things it continuously brings up is that we keep to the way. And there used to be a way about us as a diaspora, as a people. For those of you who are old school enough to remember when your elders used to say things like, Black folks don't do that, right? There used to be a certain thing that we just didn't do. And so for me, a major is keeping with the tradition, right? There are some things that I feel like our elders and our ancestors definitely had right. And I see us in, you know, the age and the space of integration veering away from the way. And so for me, the way is anything different from the colonizer's road, and trying to stay off of that road and keep into the narrow path. And my narrow path is not necessarily a performative identity, but recognizing who I am from a spiritual standpoint. So who I am on the inner, and not necessarily being so obsessed with this outer domain, right? Because we can all agree that race is a construct and is not one that we all have to play a part in, right? So because what Blackness means to me here in Atlanta, Georgia, can mean something completely different to someone in the Bahamas, to someone in New York, to a sister living in Utah and a brother in South Carolina. Like, our Blackness does not mean the same thing, but there is something about us as huge people that is the same, right? And so not trying to move away from that, but steer toward that, and using my knowledge systems and my understanding of being a human being, and trying to relay that and share that and give that to others. And a lot of that really fizzles down to love, unconditional, and how I portray and give that. You know, one of the things, not to piggyback too much or double back too much on what Martha was talking about, chattel slavery. You know, the thing about chattel slavery and us, we weren't even given the same rights as animals, right? If you really think about it, those of you who are familiar with Toni Morrison's Beloved, one of the things that Paul D talks about is a rooster mister having more identity than he did, having more rights than he did. We weren't even given the same rights as animal. A cow could moo. We weren't even allowed our moo. And our moo was our dance, our moo was our drum. We weren't even given the things that are like a part of our being. And so, and then the other thing, in comparing our walk with animals, I'm not for like the variation or the differentiation or separation of who we are as human beings and from animals. We're all animals. Because we up on two legs walking and we can talk, supposedly we're civilized, and yet we see from our administration that is not so, right? And so when you're talking about animals Our understanding of animals is how colonizers have treated animals, which is why they are endangered. It's the same way they have treated us as human beings, which is why we have also become endangered. Where you're asking, do Native Americans even exist? That's problematic, right? Because under the guise and gaze of a colonizer, Native people don't even exist. And so I'm not interested in separating who I am from animals. I feel like all are thou. And because we haven't done a good job of protecting all is the reason we are in the place and space that we are now, right? Because of industrialism, capitalism, and colonism. All these isms have us to where we are now. And so I'm looking for ways to get away from that and return to an indigenous mindset in which all can be safe. And I'll end with that.
Thank you. And Martha, I know you have to run in a second, so I'll open the floor to you.
I could not have said it better, Shaniqua. Thank you. And I'm going to follow your journey because you were singing my song loud and proud, and it just everything that everyone has contributed. But that's how I was taught. You know,
I'm looking y'all up on Facebook right now.
I was taught by my I do Instagram more than that, so find me on there too. But okay. That's how we were raised. You know, I was raised to that all living things are the same. You know, and you mean trees, nature, the land, animals. We are all the same, and we have our responsibility. Our particular responsibility as human beings are to be the caretakers of all of these things. So it's our responsibility to look after all of that, and so that it can take care of us. And when we don't do that, that's when the system breaks down. Now, what's interesting to me was, I was asked to write an essay for on this very subject, and it was difficult for me. Well, it wasn't difficult for me. I thought it might be difficult for them to accept because but I said these things very much, you know, similar to what Ms. Shaniqua said. But Christianity teaches that that there's a hierarchy, a system of hierarchy. And once it teaches you that system of hierarchy, then they immediately place humans above. And it's written in the Christian doctrine as having dominion over animals. And when that happens, they can decide that the people in power have dominion over everything. And once there's a separation in this viewpoint of a hierarchy, they can break down this dominion into having dominion over particular groups of other humans as well. And that's where you start getting into these constructs that people in power make sure that they are at the top of this. And so the breakdown has happened. And if the basis of the American colonization is built on this doctrine of Christianity, which was approved by the Pope, that allowed white people to go around the world and murder people who did not listen to them in the eyes of what they deem as bringing God, their version of God and Christianity. They had the right from the Pope to murder anyone and take over their land, you know, in the name of what they feel is this hierarchy. And so this is a system that has worked for a long time. It's vicious, very ugly, and we're at the age now once again where we recognize that, and we are all choosing not to accept that. And so when that happens, it is violent, it is horrible, and there will be a lot of death, as we see. You know, this is not anything new. This has been our story for centuries. what it is that it is new because it is visual, because we have the phones, you know. So when we have our phones as the proof, it's new for white people who can see this now. And COVID has brought everybody home, kept everybody in the house where we are glued to these screens. Because when this first happened with it, you know, more recently with Ferguson, it didn't stop people. White people didn't take to the streets like this. You know, when this happened with the gentleman in Jasper, Texas in 1990, when this happened with Rodney King, you know, it didn't stop people from their flow. But it was because people are home with no jobs that this has forced an awakening of people who were not aware that this was everyday life for Black and brown people. So um, let's hope that this awakening can lead to a way where the people in power have to step down and allow a more egalitarian society. And that can only come from people stepping down and not take and allow other people to take space. So that's all I got.
Well, thank you. I know both you and Shaniqua also have to go at 4. So I just want to wrap this up just by saying, you know, thank you all for coming and dealing with the tech issues and all that kind of stuff that was going on. And hopefully we can continue this dialogue and continue these relationships and build from them. As always, thank you to each guest and all your contributions. It's been amazing. And hopefully we'll have this conversation next month again. And in the meantime, visit arccenter.org for any other updates, for archive of this video as well. And we'll probably be piecing out pieces of it and throwing it on our social media as well. Thank you all of our guests, and we will see you next time.
Thank you. I have a new tribe, y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. So great to meet you guys.
Awesome.
Likewise. Great to meet you all.
Thank you.